When you travel and experience local food, when you return home, do you crave those dishes? When I was in Japan last year, one of my favorite foods I had there was ramen, as it was packed with flavor, hot on these cold days, and each shop had a different variation on the same dish. So naturally, upon returning home, I set out to make my own version so that I can make it any night of the week, and here's the results of months of recipe testing and tweaking. The ramen I've been making most consistently contains 4 components. The first is the spicy miso base. That will be the main flavor once dissolved in the broth. The second, for some crunchy texture, is a Katsu style tofu that is crispy on the exterior and moist on the interior. Third item is, of course, some instant ramen noodles that specifically are the plain flavor, as most of the flavoring will come from the base. And lastly, a simple homemade mushroom broth that brings everything together. The best thing about this recipe is that everything can be made ahead of time and then simply reheated before serving, except for the noodles, as they take the least amount of time to cook. Now, starting with the spicy miso base, this will be the first thing we add to the bowl. Now, to make it, you first want to add about a tablespoon of miso paste, which will add that deep, savory, and salty, as well as some umami flavor to the dish. And then for some heat, I'm going to add in a spoonful of gochujung, followed by some chili garlic sauce, then chili oil, dark soy sauce, sesame oil, and lastly sesame paste. But if you can't find that, tahini will also be a good substitute, because it's really hard to find sesame paste in stores, even when going to a special grocery store like H Mart. Then whisk all those ingredients together until they start to form a thick paste that sticks to the whisk, and this can be put aside until ready for assembly or placed in the fridge until later. Next up is a simple mushroom broth. I've made this broth both with regular and dried mushrooms. So to start, slice them in the thickness of about 1/4 of an inch, and then add them to a pot with about 6 cups of water with a little pinch of salt. Allow the mushrooms to steep into the liquid. Add a nice simmer for as short as 30 minutes or up to an hour depending on the time that you have available. And this broth, of course, can be made ahead of time and still be reheated to a boil when you're ready to make this dish. Then add 5 grams of dried kombu to a bowl, ladle 2 portions of that hot mushroom broth into it, and let that kombu and broth steep for about 8 minutes. After that time, you'll see the kombu will start to turn green as it starts to rehydrate it, and then just filter it by pouring it over a mesh sieve back into the liquid with the pot and in the broth, and bring that back up to a boil before serving. Now for some crunchy texture. I'm starting with 1 block of extra firm tofu and cutting that into 8 rectangles. Then arrange it to fit on a cutting board and use a towel to pat down and remove some of the excess residual liquid. Now for the dredge, I'm going to combine flour, salt, garlic powder, cornstarch, some fresh cracked black pepper, and some chili powder. Then whisk all the dry ingredients together until homogeneous, and in the second bowl I'm going to crack 1 egg with a little splash of oat milk, and then begin to beat the eggs until they come together. Lastly, I'm going to add some Panko style breadcrumbs to a 3rd bowl, and it's time for the classic 3-part breading. So first, stick the tofu in the flour mixture, coat it on all sides, knocking off any excess, and then dip it in the egg mixture, allowing the excess egg to drip off, and lastly, cover it completely with the breadcrumbs. Then to a cast iron pan, add in a good amount of oil, such as vegetable oil, as the tofu is going to be shallow fried over medium heat. Once the oil is up to temperature, add in the breaded tofu, which in my case basically fills the entire pan. And then once the pan side of the tofu is golden brown, flip it over and cook the other side to match. Then it's time to slice it up before placing it on top of a bowl of ramen. And as you run your knife across the top, you should hear that lovely crispy texture, and cut it up into 4 even slices so you can easily eat it with chopsticks later. And the result should be, as I said before, a moist interior and a crispy, crunchy exterior. The last item is to cook the ramen. So I found these plain instant ramens at H Mart. So to cook them, I just basically take them out of the package, place them in a pot of boiling water until they're done. I use chopsticks to move the noodles around inside the boiling water to test their doneness, and they should fully come apart when completely cooked. Now for assembly, I first add 2 spoonfuls of that spicy miso base, pour the hot mushroom broth over it, and then I whisk it together until the paste is fully dissolved. Then I add 1 more spoonful of broth to fill the bowl, and then I'm going to add in the drained ramen noodles. For topping, I like to put the cooked mushrooms on one side of the broth, followed by 2 of the Katsu style tofu blocks, and optionally, I like to add a good sprinkle of sesame seeds. And it's time to eat. Thank you for watching, and if you want to see other recipes that are recreated from my travels, click the video on the screen now, and I hope to see you again soon.